Nothing in this podcast is meant for medical advice. Please discuss your own healthcare with your healthcare providers. Thank you. Welcome to your B-side, your midlife metamorphosis. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Midlife is not a crisis, it's a catalyst to your best life. Join me each week for a dose of mental, physical, and spiritual health, life, grief, adventure, and opportunity. It's time to flip the record over. Can psilocybin cure PTSD? Can psilocybin support you in menopause? Welcome to your B-side, your midlife metamorphosis with me, your host, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Today, I want to talk about something very personal to me, and that is my relationship with psilocybin. As a health professional, I have often hidden maybe my relationship to psilocybin because it's not as widely accepted as it could be in the medical community, let's just say. And I do think that in recent years, it has been studied a lot more. There's a lot of science behind it now. People in the United States and Switzerland and other European countries are studying it and are starting to use it as therapies. So I'm going to talk to you about psilocybin, and I'm going to talk to you about not only the benefits of using psilocybin, but I'm going to talk about my own personal experience so that you get kind of the lay of the land, because it's something that's starting to become more popular. They're doing a lot more studies and safety around psilocybin as a treatment for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and there's a lot of ways that psilocybin can help symptoms of perimenopause, menopause, and I'm going to just put a plug in here for andropause, and that is the male version of hormone changes in midlife. Now, we won't go too far down that road just yet, but stay tuned for some of my podcasts in the future when I bring on some doctors studying male menopause. So if you haven't already, I'm going to encourage you to put on your walking shoes and walk out your door and go and take me for a little walk, because this podcast today is going to be fabulous. So my relationship with psilocybin started a long time ago. And I'm going to just say that I was one of those curious people in their early 20s who experimented with hallucinogenics and psychedelics, and I absolutely did mushrooms with my friends. I did LSD. I smoked pot. I did all that stuff. Okay. And for me, it was escapism. It was curiosity. It was recreation. It was fun. Sometimes it wasn't fun. Sometimes we had a few bad trips. But that was me in my early 20s experimenting and having fun with my friends. Little did I know that it would be the very thing that completely changed my life. So when I was 23 years old, my older sister Sherry was murdered. And gosh, that got me. I've talked about this a lot, but that kind of got me just now. She was murdered by her husband. Her husband killed her. And I will talk about this more in another episode, but what's important about this is that moment in time is when I developed PTSD. Her murder was extremely traumatic, as anyone can imagine, and it wasn't just that we were grieving her death, we were also dealing with a crime, and we were dealing with this deep betrayal by who was my brother-in-law, the man who married her. And as a family, we were dealing with this trauma. And for me personally, I developed PTSD that stayed with me for decades. And it started to come out and be more pronounced, believe it or not, when I went to medical school. So I went back to medical school. I was working in the music industry, and I went back to medical school in my 30s. And the stress of, I had Henry, a baby. I had my older son, Arlie, and I was a parent and a spouse and running a household, and I'd just gone back to medical school with this new baby. And the stress of all that actually brought out my PTSD more because I was under extreme stress to go through medical school. The irony, right? The irony that you are in study to be a healer and in study to help people, and it is literally causing harm to you as you're entering this field of medicine, as you're going through this insane amount of stress. So my PTSD would flare up. And in my relationship, that wasn't going so well with my spouse. It wasn't going so well with my children. And I did complete medical school, and I almost felt like I spent the first few years in early practice just trying to get my adrenals back online, just trying to get my own physical manifestation of that amount of stress under control and to heal myself, to start to heal myself, ironically, from, not only all the things that had happened to me thus far in life and my own sort of traumatic experiences and my sister's murder, my brother's death. We already talked about that. I do have a history of being sexually assaulted. There's a lot of stuff going on. And then the stress of medical school. And I was just starting to enter my own healing, like starting to really take care of myself. And this was inspired by the healing of other people or working with my patients and my clients. And it became really evident really quickly that I had to walk my talk, that I had to heal myself, that I couldn't just sit here and tell people everything that they should do and make recommendations and try to help people if I wasn't helping myself, because it became an integrity issue. And back to my PTSD, it was really flaring up. And on top of that, we then went into the 2020 lockdowns and the COVID pandemic. And that didn't help the PTSD either, right? So I had this talk with my spouse about our relationship and how the PTSD was showing up in our relationship. And he was honest with me about the struggle with it. And he pointed out how my PTSD was impacting my relationship with my children. And that was hard to hear, but it was necessary to hear the truth about that. And so, props to my husband for coming forward and talking to me about it. Well, and then fast forward, I've talked about my hip replacements. So I went in for that second hip replacement that then literally put me in that depression I talked about, which then, had me climbing Kilimanjaro. And if you missed that episode, you got to go back to episode 1, the very first one of my podcast episodes. I tell that story. But in that depression, one thing I didn't yet talk about was what happened in my relationship with psilocybin. So I was so depressed and I was having such a difficult time during that second hip replacement, and I was in therapy and talk therapy. And I had a therapy session one day and I asked my own therapist, hey, I think I need a bigger intervention than this. I think I need to do something. I need to do something like psychedelic treatment, or I need a bigger intervention. Can you help me? Can you recommend someone? And she sent me a referral to a psychiatrist who also worked with people in psilocybin journeys. And because of the legality of it in the United States, it depends on the state you're in and the legality of it. I was in Washington. It is not currently legal in Washington. I think maybe in clinical trials and very controlled settings and things like that, but it's not regularly used as of, the recording of this podcast. I know they're working on it, but it was in Oregon. And so the way that medicine works is that you can treat someone in the state you're licensed in. So I had to travel to Oregon, right? So I did. I traveled to Oregon and I did my very first psilocybin treatment. It was very therapeutic. It was a very low dose, and you lie comfortably in a bed with a blindfold on. You've got your therapist is also your DJ. They're playing music without lyrics. They're playing all instrumental music. And, you have another person there. So there's two people there kind of guiding you. And you take your psilocybin and you lie back comfortably And it's a very internal journey. It's a very different experience than a recreational journey. And because you do have the blindfold on, you have that music on, and the whole point is to go inward. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some of the science behind it, but for now, I'm just going to stick to my own personal experience. So my own personal experience was this. It was like the psilocybin took away the stress response, like the hard-wired stress response. The usual thoughts I think when I'm stressed out, the usual PTSD thought patterns that would kick in. It was like all of that melted away, and it was like the rest of my brain woke up. So when you have PTSD or you have chronic stress, anxiety, and depression, you often have these ruts in your brain or like in your wiring. You have these ruts of like thought patterns that impact you in a very real biochemical way, that your neurons are literally firing in the same ruts over and over and over. And the psilocybin seemed to disrupt that, and I could relax. And when I relaxed and I could really relax into the experience, what it did for me was actually open up how much sadness I had. And how much sadness I had about my brother's death, how much sadness I had about my sister's death, how much sadness I had about so many things in my life, how much sadness I had about my relationship with my own mother, where I've gone through life feeling like I didn't have a mother-daughter bond and that I didn't feel important to my mother. There were 14 kids in our family, and I felt very much like a number and not a person. And it's not to place blame on my parents or my mother. She's doing the best she absolutely could. But it's like I woke up to the sadness, and I was able to cry, and I felt like I was crying for hours. Now, I talked to my therapist after, and he reports it being like 15 minutes. But I felt like I was just crying and crying and crying and crying for hours. And then something else happened. It seemed that some of the stressful events that had caused my PTSD, I could actually look at them without the stress of it. It was so fascinating to me. I could actually think about things that had happened in my life, traumatic experiences. I could think about these things, and it was safe to think about them, that the stress response didn't kick in, that I could think about them, I could process them, I could see them for what they were. And believe it or not, I was overwhelmed with how little they actually mattered in the grand scheme of things. I was actually able to access a sense of forgiveness to any abusers, forgiveness to my sister's murderer, forgiveness to anything and anyone, you name it. It all just the tension that we usually feel and the stress we usually feel in trauma or in conflict, it seemed to just melt away. And that was my experience. And I could look at everything and see it. And I even said the words to my therapist, this feels like small potatoes. All these things just feel small in the grander scheme of life. So here's another interesting thing that happened. This psilocybin helped me remember who I really was. And I've been talking about spirituality, and I've been talking about a sense of purpose on this podcast. But this is where it really clicked in for me. I've always been a spiritual person. I've always listened to my intuition. I've always had this experience that I didn't always know how I was going to solve a problem, but I always knew I would. I've always had an image in my mind of how I thought my life might go, and then I've like lived into that image. But what the psilocybin did is it's like it helped me remember who I came to this earth to be. And it was a remembering. And it was almost like I could touch back and remember not being alive on earth right now. I don't know how else to explain it. But then I could also touch back and remember other lives I've had. Now, this is where it gets a little I don't know what everybody else's experience with psilocybin is or other experiences that people have had. But I do have this sense of multiple lives. Like I am someone who's always believed in past lives, in multiple lives. And quite frankly, I think a huge percentage of the population does believe in that. We make jokes about it. Oh, in another life, I was this or that. But I think there is some truth there. And when my son Henry was younger, when he could talk, when he first could start talking, he would actually tell me and my spouse stories about last time. That's what he would call it. He would say, last time, and he would tell some story, right? And this is at a very young age. And there was a time when he was in the bath and I was giving him a bath and he looked right at me and he said, Mom, last time you weren't my mom. Last time you were my sister. And we were in the bayou. And I was like, what the hell? What in the actual fuck is going on right now? My 2-year-old child, where did he learn the word bayou in the first place, right? Secondly, what the hell is he talking about right now? But you know what? I didn't correct him at all. I just said, oh, really? Interesting. Tell me more about that. And he said something about a fire, okay? So just put a pin in that for a second. Back to my psilocybin PTSD treatment. I had this memory of being in a boat, like a canoe maybe, or some other kind of boat, in the bayou with Henry, and we were kids. And I knew it was Henry. And I sat straight up in my psilocybin treatment, and I almost shouted, I was in the bayou with Henry, because I remember later my therapist saying, what was that all about? Asking me about it. And it was a memory. I don't know how else to explain it. It was like a memory. It wasn't a hallucination. It was like a memory. I remembered it. And why this is important is because I think one of the most powerful things about psilocybin for trauma and PTSD treatments is I honestly believe that some of our trauma and some of our traumatic stress and some of it is not all from this life. It's not all from this life that we're leading right now. That some of it, I think we carry with us as a soul. And every time we come back and are reborn, there's some new growth for us. And for me personally, this was clear as day in this treatment, clear as day that this is what was going on. And so I was able to not only see my current life traumas, I was starting to be shown some past life traumas. And I was shown being a small little girl, maybe 4 years old, and I remember it clear as day, wearing a pink dress and playing the harpsichord like a prodigy, okay? And the feeling I had was that everyone was always talking about me because I was this prodigy harpsichord player. And yet something was wrong. Something was wrong in this situation. And the feeling I got, and I'm not sure exactly what was going on, but there was something going on that was not good. There was some sort of abuse going on. There was some sort of assault going on with me at that time. And at the time that I was born, as far as they were concerned, right? Like I wasn't inherently born the wrong gender, but that was the conversation around me, was that they weren't going to keep developing me as a musician and an artist because I was a girl. And there was something really, quite frankly, fucked up going on in that situation. And I remembered this as part of this treatment session, as part of some of my stress and trauma that I have had with music and with my own musicianship in this life. So it was just fascinating to me. Hey, this is Dr. Amy Lindsey, your host of Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis YouTube channel and podcast. If you want to be more involved with my B-Side community, you can join on School. That's SKOOL. You can join my school community. Look me up, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Welcome to Your B-Side and request to join. As far as my deceased siblings go, the other piece to the psilocybin treatment was that I was asking, with intention. I wanted to understand what my relationship with my sister's death was and her murder. And during my first treatment, I was not shown any of that. That question was not answered. But I was really present to my brother's death and the sadness I had around that. Now, fast forward 6 or 9 months later, I did go in for a second treatment. And in this treatment, here's what happened. When I started to go under and I started to feel the effects of the psilocybin, I had this soul, I don't know how else to explain it, like a person come to me, and I couldn't quite see who they were. And they said, "Hey, I need you to come with me. I need to show you something, but you're going to need a boost." And so I sat up, and I said to my therapist, "Hey, I think I need more psilocybin." And he was like, yeah, we're not going to give you any more psilocybin." And I said, "Yeah, but didn't you say that some people need a boost because they're not going deep enough?" And he's like, "Yeah, you're sensitive. You go deep just plenty." I said, "Right." And I explained, I said, "I think there's a soul, and I think it's my dead sister. And I think she's asking me to come with her, and I need a boost." And he just said, "Okay, I'm going to honor that." And so he gave me more psilocybin, and I laid back down. And the experience I had was that my dead sister came to me, and she said, "You need to come with me." And she took me to this place. And the only way to describe it was that it was like caves under an ocean. So not only did we go to the floor of the ocean, but we went like underneath in these caves in the ocean. And when I was there, the feeling was dark, and it was, I don't know how else to explain it. It was like sticky. It was like luring me in, almost like I was in some sort of movie or some sort of mystical movie where there was something evil luring me in. And I wasn't scared though. And she was explaining to me that she had been spending this time here since her murder because her soul had had so many journeys where she couldn't quite fulfill the growth that she was meant to fulfill. Like she kept getting sucked into danger, into self-sabotage, she just had a lot of bad things happen to her in her multiple lives. And so she had just kind of been in this place that was in between lives where she was learning and growing there. And part of it was also that she was helping other souls who had been through traumatic experiences, who had maybe had suicide. And, my sister-in-law was there, my husband's sister. She died by alcoholism not too long ago. And she was in this place. I witnessed seeing her there, that her soul was still kind of lost or that needed a little boost or something before being reborn. This was this experience I was having. And my sister said to me, "Listen, I am tired of you using me as an excuse not to live your life. I am tired of you using my death and your trauma around it as an excuse not to be the person you're supposed to be." And she said, "It's time to let it go. And I've let it go. And you need to go be who you're supposed to be." And she then told me a story about Henry, my son, and said, in a past life, he and I were in a traumatic experience together in a fire. And I died. And it basically fucked him up. It fucked Henry up. And he had struggled in like the next couple of lives he had. He had really, really struggled, and there was a lot of dark things that came. And she said he had been down there, like in this place under the ocean with her. And she had been shepherding him and helping him. And that he chose to come be born as my son in this life. And that my job is to grow and be myself and help him grow and be himself. And that in this life, we each have something to do and we have to help each other do it. And if you listen to my last episode about parenting and about moving to France and giving him this soccer opportunity and all the things that I was talking about in my last episode, this will make more sense to you now. This sort of symbiotic relationship that parents and children have in this life. We are all here to grow and to help each other grow. Okay, so that was a very personal story. And that was my experience in this psilocybin treatment. So here's what happened next, okay? I feel like that completely decimated my PTSD, like completely. And it actually after one treatment, and especially after two. So the symptoms of PTSD that I had had for 2 decades or more were just gone. I feel so much more relaxed. I don't yell at my children. I was yelling at my children a lot because I would just be like, my nervous system was just fried. And I feel so much just calmer and settled in my body. My body feels just calmer and more settled. My thoughts, I notice how I think these days. My thoughts don't just go into this automatic stress response. And I really feel like there was some genuine, real scientific rewiring of my brain. And so let's talk about the science of that a little bit. So there's something in our brain, a pathway we call the default mode network. And when the default mode network is healthy, that's the network that we live in sort of this awe and wonder, that we daydream, that we have self-reflection, that we think about our life, right? And this is all great stuff. But when you have trauma or when you have something happen that causes acute stress, and if you have compounded grief, even if you have like multiple deaths that you're still processing or having trouble processing, then what happens is the default mode network goes into chronic stress. It goes into anxiety and rumination and depressed thoughts. It goes into self-criticism. And so what the psilocybin does is it actually releases the overactive default mode network, like the negative part of it. It sort of like relaxes it and gets you out of those thoughts. And what happens is then you have more of a global connection in your brain, that parts of you that were not connecting before are suddenly making connections in your brain. So this is fascinating to me. It literally interrupts that stress, those ruts of stress. The other thing, so now this is where I love talking about depression and mental health and perimenopause and menopause and andropause, right? So I talked about this before in this sort of menopause, perimenopause episode about mental health and how that's impacted specifically by declining progesterone and estrogens and testosterone for that matter. And what's interesting scientifically, if you want to like get into the weeds of it, I won't get too far into the weeds of it, but I talked before about how estrogen and serotonin tend to travel together in the body, okay? And the psilocybin has action on those same receptors that the estrogen and the serotonin have action on. So the psilocybin is actually like giving you a serotonin boost or like even helping with your estrogen. And there are now studies saying that if you are on estrogen therapy, that psilocybin therapy can actually help modulate the estrogen therapy and help it. So absolutely, this speaks to these midlife hormone changes as well. It's like win, 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 win. Now, is psilocybin right for you? I have no idea. I'm not your doctor. This isn't medical advice. I just told you a very personal story about something that completely decimated my PTSD, got me in touch with a spiritual side of myself, and really helped me understand my relationship to music, my relationship to my family, my relationship to my son. And bonus, I'm totally in perimenopause and I got a little bonus. So please ask your own doctor. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, but I do think that psychedelics are the future. Thanks for listening. This has been Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis with Dr. Amy Lindsey. This has been another episode of Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis with Dr. Amy Lindsey. Be sure to follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.